Hello and welcome. You are watching a live broadcast here on WION World is One, and we have some news that's breaking over here. The Indian government has come out with a new notification on the lockdown situation in the country. The lockdown will remain in containment zones until the 30th of June. Meanwhile, there'll be a phased reopening in the non-containment zone. This on a day when India reported its highest spike in COVID-19 cases, with 7,964 being reported. And now the latest is that the Indian government has come out with a notification which says that the lockdown in containment zones, the red zones which have been identified, will extend until the end of the month of June, till the 30th of June. While there will be a phased reopening in the non-containment zones in the country. That's the latest. Lockdown 5.0 has been announced, and it will be a graded lockdown this time around, the fifth phase of the lockdown. Those in the red containment zones, the lockdowns in the red containment zones are set to continue further for another 4 weeks, from the 1st of June to the 30th of June. Meanwhile, certain specific relaxations have been given. We have our political editor Kartikeya Sharma now joining us on the phone line. Kartikeya, talk to us. This is a phased lockdown as well as a phased reopening.
I think it's two things happening at the same time. When we are saying a phased lockdown and the phased reopening, what is happening is that the government is trying to recalibrate both opening and stalling of the spread of the virus. Now, the issue is that multiple state governments had demanded that they should be allowed to zone the areas, and the news which we broke last time. So now, since the lockdown has been extended till 30th of June, and what they have done is that certain relaxations have been given to certain businesses. But I think the bigger or the broader takeaway for me is that the religious places of worship, hotels, restaurants, hospitality services will be permitted to open from June 8th, 2020, which means that the most important areas which would have led to larger congregations, which is hotels, restaurants, hospitalities, malls, places of worship, they will kick back into action. Now, this can be a cause of concern also, because, you would allow the normal way of life to assume. But in the case the normal way of life assumes, it also tells you that the infection rate can spike all across India. Now, this is something the government must have calibrated as to why they want to do it. But I think by 8th of June, they want to completely kickstart India into its normal way of life. So for them to open places of worship, hotels, restaurants, and hospitality services, I think it's a big takeaway.
Right, absolutely. Opening hotels, restaurants and religious places post the 8th of June for all those tuning into this broadcast. That's the latest order issued by the Minister of Home Affairs of India. Kartikeya Sharma with us on the phone. Kartikeya, even as those are reopened, the containment zones in the country, the red zones in the country, will continue to be under the current form of lockdown until the end of June. Absolutely.
So what it says is that in the areas outside containment zones, all activities will be permitted except following which will be allowed, which means that certain rules and procedures, Krishna, of the lockdown 4 will be in place. Now, for example, the following activities will be allowed, which, as we discussed, from effect from June 8th, which is religious places, hotels, restaurants and shopping malls, which means that the people who were employed there get back their employment. Now, schools, colleges, educational institutions will be opened after consultation with the state government, which means that the lockdown in this avatar will see the opening up of the educational institutions only when chief ministers allow them. And then, most important of all, based on the assessment of the situation, dates for restarting the following activities will be decided: international travel, metro, cinema halls, gymnasiums, swimming pools, entertainment parks, theaters, bars, auditoriums, assembly halls. So, these are the new directives. But yes, night curfew will remain in force. But there's a difference now. Earlier, the night curfew was between 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Now, the night curfew has been reduced to 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. So, there is a relaxation in the curfew also. Now, the lockdown will continue to take place in the containment zones. Containment zones will be run the way they have been run. But I think what they have done is that they have tweaked the curfew areas for the orange and the green zones. Certain provisions of vulnerable people continue. Persons above 65 years of age, pregnant women, people with comorbidities, they will not be allowed after the curfew. The application of Arogya Setu continues, Krishna. These guidelines will be strictly enforced. The penal provision also remains. But again, in this case, state governments have been given greater power in terms of deciding what is good or bad for them. So I think we can say after 8th of June, we will see a new normal India emerging in which state chief ministers, Krishna, will decide how theatre halls will open, or if the malls open, will they open on odd and even, how many people can sit in a restaurant, how many waiters can work, how many footfalls can be allowed. All this will be decided at a regional level. So in a way, we can say that this lockdown is less of a lockdown, but more of an opening up procedure of the Indian economy.
All right, Kartikeya Sharma, putting that into perspective. Kartikeya, quickly, before we let you go, at the end of the day, this is a three-phased reopening of areas outside of the containment zones. Phase 1 will include religious places, hotels, restaurants, shopping malls, as you've been telling us. Phase 2 will be schools, colleges and educational institutions. And Phase 3 will be international air travel of passengers, metro rail, cinema halls and gymnasiums and, social, political, sports and entertainment and academic and activities and large congregations of that sort. So in that sense, this is giving a guideline to the local governments, the regional governments, the state governments as to how to go about reopening their economies.
I think this is more in line with the federal structure. See, for example, the state of Kerala and Delhi believe that the people should be home quarantined, and they believe that the institutional quarantine does not function. The state of Uttar Pradesh believes that no, if a person is found to be COVID-19 positive, he should be sent to an institutional quarantine because they don't expect everyone to be monitored from a state level because it's a big state. It's unlike Kerala. So every state will need to decide on their own as to how they would like to walk this path. But I would say that the biggest decision the government has taken is to leave the decision to open up malls and allow places of worship to open after 8th of June. Okay. I think that's a very, very big decision because world over, if you see, the first area of when we say the normalcy has resumed is when we allow people to go to their religious centers or, allow sporting institutions to open up. But then, lastly, children. I think that's a call which the government will need to take very seriously. No government will need to rush into the decision to open schools and colleges because if you expose them to COVID-19, it can brutally impact or it can disrupt our social infrastructure, social amenity because, once the children of the society starts getting impacted, it impacts the peace. So I think no one will take a decision in a hurry to send children back to schools and colleges.
Right. Kartikeya Sharma joining us on the phone line. We also have our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibbal, now joining us live on the broadcast as we break this latest on Lockdown 5.0 in India news for you. Siddhant, talk to us. What's the latest that you are picking up on this latest notification from the Ministry of Home Affairs?
Well, we can safely now say that lockdown has been removed in large part of the country, barring, of course, the containment zones. Lockdown now only stays in the containment zones, which will be demarcated by the various governments, local governments, in fact, here in India. And talking about the details, the government has called it a phased opening of the country, and it is divided into 3 phases. In the first phases, the focus is on religious places and other places like shopping malls, which will be opened after or on 8th of June, which is approximately a week from now, little more than a week from now. And then, of course, schools and educational institutions, but that will be decided by the state governments. And finally, the focus will be on metro stations and travel through airlines. That will be in the third phase. So largely the big story is that India is opening up and India will be opening up very, very fast, barring, of course, the containment zone where the number of cases still remain high. Other than that, we can tell you that focus is on Arogya Setu, that it is something that is that the government suggests that people should continue using it. The curfew is something that remains the other key focus. But by and large, we know that the number of cases in India have risen. In fact, they have crossed 1,50,000, and we have seen the number of deaths also rising. But what is the good news is the number of active cases, which it seems have now flattening up, which is a kind of a good news. So by and large, the big story as of now is on the lockdown. This of course is the lockdown 5.0, but we actually can't say it as a lockdown because it is a phased opening of the country, which is the first phase which is going to start from 1st of June, and then of course second phase and the third phase.
Siddhant Sibal reporting live from India's capital, New Delhi, on Lockdown 5.0, which is, from the looks of it, as Siddhant has been telling us, this is the signal for the reopening of the Indian economy. Kartikeya Sharma continues to be with us on the phone line. Kartikeya, isn't that what it is, Kartikeya? This is a clear signal from the Indian government that India is going to open up rather quickly, because from the 8th of July is when religious places, which is a week from now, religious places, hotels, restaurants and shopping malls are going to be open. My question is, that's phase one of the reopening, and these things, religious places, hotels, restaurants and malls, is this also incumbent upon the state government agreeing to it and then reopening it?
To take it away from where my colleague Siddhant left, you see, what are the areas the government has decided to open from 8th of June? It says religious places, places of worship for public, hotels, restaurants, hospitality industry, and shopping malls. Now, it also goes on to say that the Ministry of Family Health and Welfare, with the standing operating procedures for our activities in consultation with the MHA, with social distancing norms, will be put into place. Now, what is happening is that government understands that when we talk about medium and small scale industry sectors, a very strong principal component, Krishna, is also tertiary, which is entertainment, catering, and people, who are part and parcel of day-to-day activity related with food or takeaway items, which is boom post-liberalization. And if you see in urban centers, the maximum job employment which is created is through the mall system, where part of services, some are cooks, some are working in lighting department, but ultimately it's the dense employment structure which is created. Now that dense employment structure got completely out of business. So by opening these dense employment structure, the government is trying to kickstart activity. Now the larger issue is, will people go back? You see, you have changed the behavior of the people. Like, not many people would go to a restaurant to eat, but they are very happy that important restaurants in Delhi and Mumbai in India are actually catering to the people. You know, you can get food from a very good restaurant to your house. So the business model has changed. I think the government of India will need to factor in as to how the behavior of the people will change the business models. Will people go back to the malls in large number, or would they expect those services to come to them? I think that tension will come into play. But more important than that, it will allow people to come back to work. But then another issue is there. Migrants have gone back home. People who are part and parcel of this job were those who had come from small towns in India. So the small towns have got their people back. Now, how do you get them back to stay in the big cities where they were providing the backbone of the economy, which started from maid servants to those who were serving us in the top high-end restaurants or even in the five-star hotels? Krishna.
Kartikeya Sharma putting it into perspective. And for all those tuning into this broadcast, this is not Lockdown 5.0 or Lockdown 5. It's being renamed by the Indian government as Unlock 1.0, because this unlocking of the Indian economy of India will be a three-phased one. The first phase begins on the 8th of June. That's about a week from now. And in that unlock phase one, malls, hotels, restaurants, religious places have been allowed to reopen. But bear in mind, this reopening is only outside the containment zones, the red zones in the country. Only outside of the containment zones will all of these be reopened. But that is a huge decision that's coming in from the Indian government to unlock one. Siddhant Sibal also continues to be with us on the broadcast live from India's capital, New Delhi. Siddhant, even the Ministry of Home Affairs' guidelines document has referred to this as not lockdown, but unlock one.
Well, yes, a phased opening of the country, and I've just gone through the guidelines again, and barring the unlocking of the country, which will happen in the 3 phases, the focus is also on the free movement of the people between the states, something that the Indian government has been emphasizing, and that will help in movement of people. We know the migrant crisis in the country, and that, of course, has been dominating the headlines here. But other than that, the curfew is something that will be there in the country from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. This curfew will remain, and there will be only movement of people for essential requirement. Remember, in the previous lockdown, which in fact is still underway, the lockdown 4.0, the curfew was put in place from 7 p.m. till 7 a.m. Now, of course, the lockdown timings have been changed from 9 p.m. till 5 a.m. But the focus, of course, remains that social distancing, people wearing masks, these things are something that the Indian government has been emphasizing, trying to create awareness regarding these things. But the big story tomorrow here in India will be the fact that country is opening finally after months, because remember, the Indian government had first put in place lockdown 1, which was one of the strictest in the world, on 25th of March. Before that, we know that there was Janta curfew, which kind of was a precursor, and then the lockdown started for 21 days, then lockdown 2 came, 3 came, and of course currently we know lockdown 4 is underway. But lockdown 4 saw primarily the coordination between the states and the center, because the states were given more power in terms of taking on-ground decision, because the focus from lockdown 3 had become for the country that there needs to be a balance between the lockdown and making sure that the economic activity continues, because that is something that was the big worrisome factor. We know the GDP numbers just came yesterday, and it was 3.1 for the last quarter of last financial year. But remember, that does not account for the lockdown details, because lockdown is going to severely impact the growth of one of the largest economies in the world.
That's the latest. We're breaking down the Indian government's guidelines for what's going to happen from the 1st of June. For all those tuning into this broadcast, it's going to be a phased reopening, a 3-phased reopening, and this right now, what the latest guidelines from the Indian Ministry of Home Affairs is. This will be Unlock 1 starting the first week of June, Unlock Phase 1, in which, bear in mind, extended after a point to Phase 2 and Phase 3. Phase 2 involves the schools, colleges and educational institutions. Start of the containment zones, the red zones in the country, hotels, restaurants, malls, places. Phase 3 will involve international air travel and metro rail services. So for now, places of worship have been allowed to reopen from the 8th of June. That's metro rail services continue to remain closed. Kartikeya Sharma continues to be with us on the phone. And Kartikeya, that's another important point to note here, isn't it, Kartikeya? The metro rail services across India will continue to remain closed for now.
Absolutely. And I think, another important point is that there will be no extra permits required for the intra-state and interstate travel. I think that's the most important aspect, because a lot of people, a lot of families were broken down because of one son was working in one district in India, another son, the parents were in another district, and they could not travel if one had fallen sick. So, that created a lot of social anxiety in the society. So what they have allowed is that you can pick your car, Krishna, you can go to any part of the country, no one will be stopped, but you will not be allowed to move between 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. But then, what the government has also done is that educational institutions remain closed. But international air travel, metro travel, cinema, gymnasium, swimming pools, entertainment parks, theaters, bars, auditoriums, assembly halls, and it also includes, surprisingly, social, political, sports and entertainment meetings, which means that the people can go to a temple, but you cannot have a religious congregation, which means that the various sects cannot call for 3 lakh people to assemble. You cannot go to a cinema hall, but you cannot even have a sort of a political rally, which means that political rallies in India are not allowed, religious congregations are not allowed, but you can go to a temple, you can go to a mosque, but you cannot have a Tablighi Jamaat sort of a function in the country, but you can go to your mosque to pray. So, these are the distinctions which the government has made. But I think the reason why they have made is because they don't want to create so much of jump simultaneously, which my understanding goes, which becomes unmanageable for them. Because every opening up will come with a spike. There is no doubt about it. And that spike will have to be managed by great testing and great care. So I think what we are witnessing is the second last step in the complete opening up. The complete opening up, I would say, would happen when religious congregations, political congregations, cinema halls, and most important of all, when you allow the train and the transit systems to function within densely packed places like Mumbai. But I think that is still far away. That is going to take some time now.
Kartikeya Sharma joining us on the phone line to break down the latest as far as the Indian government's decision is concerned. The lockdown is now going to be called Unlock 1, and it will begin from the 8th of June in a three-phased manner. That's the latest from the Ministry of Home Affairs' guidelines that India has issued. And for all those tuning into this broadcast just now, the Indian government has renamed it. It's not Lockdown 5.0 or Lockdown 5 anymore. It's going to be Unlock 1 outside the containment zones. That's the most important point to note over here. This unlocking is now being issued for all areas in the country outside of the red containment zones. And in the first phase of this Unlock 1, from the 8th of June, malls, restaurants, hotels, and places of worship will be allowed to open from the 8th of June. And the second phase will involve schools, colleges and educational institutions, for which it's the regional governments, the state governments and governments of union territories who will be taking a call in consultation with others. And phase 3, the plan is to open international air travel and metro rail services only in phase 3 of the unlock. That's what we understand from the Ministry of Home Affairs guidelines that we have in our possession, which has come in just a short while ago, about 15 to 20 minutes ago. So the big news coming in is that hotels, malls and restaurants will be open starting the 8th of June outside of the containment zones. However, lockdown will continue for only the containment zones until the 30th of June. Another point to note over here is that the night curfew has been relaxed, has been reduced to 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. That's another important direction coming in from the Indian government, in a sense setting the tone for the unlocking of the Indian economy. The economic impact on the economy has been extremely hard to take. We have our political editor Kartikeya Sharma still with us on the phone line, and we have Siddhant Subal also joining us live from New Delhi. Siddhant, quickly coming across to you. So for now, as I was talking to Kartikeya, metro rail services will remain closed. That's an important thing to note over here, because that's important for the mobility of so many people in big cities.
Well, Krishna, the big story is the fact that one of the largest countries in terms of population is opening up after months of lockdown. In fact, the lockdown 4 is still underway, and the big story is that this unlocking will take place very soon in terms of the religious places, in terms of malls, and of course the focus will be on the second and the third phase as well. In the second phase, the focus is education institutions, so people can, in fact, a lot of people have been impacted because of the closure of the educational institutions. In fact, months have been wasted, boards exam have been postponed because of the COVID crisis, and now of course we know that this is something that will be considered as a very positive news. The third phase will see opening of the metro station, airlines, the religious congregation. So by and large, the big story is the fact that India is opening up after months of lockdown which impacted the economy of the fifth largest economy in the world according to the IMF, and now the focus is to make sure that there is a revival in terms of the economic activity in the country, which in fact came to a standstill because of the lockdown. One of the strictest lockdown was imposed by India to make sure that the spread does not happen. Even the numbers are increasing. The silver lining is the fact that there hasn't been the estimated increase, because the government data had shown that they had made an estimation that had the lockdown not been imposed, the numbers could have crossed 5 lakh also. That is why the government has been focusing on the lockdown. But of course, the worry over economy is something that was another thing on top of the mind of the policymakers here in Delhi. And finally, to make sure that the economic activity is back on the track, we saw relaxation in the phase 4 of the lockdown, and more relaxation comes in the phase 5 of lockdown. In fact, we should not say it as a lockdown 5.0. As we have been telling to our viewers, it is unlocking of the country phase 1.
Siddhant Sibal reporting live from New Delhi. Kartikeya, this is coming in on a day in which India has reported its steepest spike in COVID-19 cases, nearly 8,000 cases in the last 24 hours.
Absolutely. Krishna, there's a very old saying when it comes to business, how do you balance the imperative of economic development with sustainable environment? Now, in the time of pandemic, the issue is how do you create or how do you develop that imperative of a livable life or a life which is sustainable with that of a safe life, which protects you from this pandemic. I think that's where the challenge lies. For example, as my colleague Siddhant was saying, that the curfew has been relaxed from 7 to 7. Instead, it's 9 p.m. to 5. If anything is to be understood from that little tweaking is the fact that in most of the urban areas, people still go out. What was happening was that people were closing their shops in urban centers by 5 p.m. in India and going back home so that they could be inside their house for curfew. But that would mean with this, they would allow 3 more hours of economic activity. So by deregulating the time, more and more economic activity is being allowed. The basic non-essential economic activities are being kept out. But then there are certain calls which the government will also need to take. For example, how do you enforce social distancing? How do you enforce that the discipline in the society remains intact so that the pandemic does not surge the way it surged in Brazil or the way it surged in Russia or the way it surged in New York? The government will also need to ensure that since we are a very densely packed country and most of our industries, Krishna, are in areas which are densely packed, unlike automated South Korean industries or Japanese industries. A lot of people work together in close proximity. How do we protect them and also allow them to stimulate the activity lies the real challenge for Narendra Modi's government in India after the sort of internal migration the lockdown perpetuated.
Kartikeya Sharma joining us on the phone line. Thank you, Kartikeya, for being with us as we break down this latest guidelines from the Indian government, which is the big signal is the unlocking of one of the strictest lockdowns in the world in India after over 2 months. The first step has been taken to unlock the Indian economy in a phased manner, 3 phases, of which unlock 1 or the unlock phase 1 will involve the opening up of malls, restaurants and places of worship and hotels as well from the 8th of June outside of the containment zones. However, restrictions and lockdowns will remain in place within the containment zones until the 30th of June. That's the latest. We also thank Siddhant Sibal, who joined us live from India's capital, New Delhi, on this broadcast. And with that, we wrap up this edition of the news. Thank you so much.